When I start driving the pins out of a sash, I like to use a woodworking clamp. I like to draw the sash together so that as much as possible those gaps that you see are pretty well eliminated. And the reason for that is when I knock this pin out of here, I wanted to make sure I'm coming back straight out that hole. If I don't, then I may not be coming straight out of that pole. Now, one of the other things to observe is the sash peg itself. Frequently, the sash peg is bigger on one side than it is on the other. I would say that's always that way. It's not. I would say that it's always been put in from one side or the other. That's not necessarily true. Sometimes they're very uniform, sometimes they're not. But it is something to keep in mind. Why? Because if you try to drive the large side of it through the hole, you're going to damage the hole, blow it out, and may do some other damage in the process if you're a little too forceful. I just flipped this over. The reason being, I looked at the peg from both sides, and the peg was clearly smaller on this end than it was on the back side. So I want to push it through there so I don't create any damage. This being the face of the sash, the interior face, I don't want to damage that going out. I've got a fairly rough tool here, but it's nothing more than a heavy piece of wire that I had for something at some point, and I kind of straightened the kinks out of it. The proper tool for this, if you wanted to go buy one and not make one, is called a pin punch. A pin punch is nothing more than a heavy metal top, not unlike a nail punch, except on the business end of it, this portion here, and they come in different diameters, 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, 3/16, whatever. It's straight, all right? It's steel, it's about 1 1/4 inch, maybe 1.5 inches long, and it is straight. In other words, it's not tapered. And the way you use that is to put it over top of the peg and tap it out with your hammer. Now this particular pin punch is a little bit narrow for my purposes. I had already started to take the peg out. Now this peg, again, there's no such thing as being the same all the time. You see, this peg has this end where the paint was on the exterior and all is a bit larger, and it's somewhat squarish actually, and then the end's been tapered a little bit, fairly roughly, but that's the peg that was in there. Now the interesting thing is it was actually a little short, so there's about 3/8 of an inch that the peg wasn't even going through the sash properly. And I'm looking through the hole, and there's something in the other side of the hole. Yeah, I just pushed it out. So, yeah. I guess you'd have to call that a faux plug, because all it was somebody put glazing compound in the hole on the other side to fill it up. So that's not a recommended procedure either. So anyway, that's all there is to removing the plug. We'll go to the other side, we'll remove the other plug, and we'll see what the condition is of the joints. Now, typically it doesn't take much force to move the stile. This is called the stile. The vertical pieces are stiles. The bottom, this is the bottom rail, which is on the sill, and the meeting rail, or check rail in this case, is on the top. Okay. Now, by simply pulling that out a bit, and you can see that didn't take a whole lot, I'm able to remove that mutton. Now, it's not in awful shape on the top of it. It's not beat up. The back side of the portion where the divider bar is mounted is not chewed out. This is fairly smooth, straight, consistent. It's not warped. It's not beat up too bad. So we can simply replace the divider bar on that piece and put it back together again. So that's one. Okay. Now, you can see now we've got a good bit of room in here to play with. So just by pushing the vertical mutton over a little bit, able to just lift the center one out. Now this center one was the one that I originally was considering for replacement. Part of the reason is these big gouges on the side of it here. Someone has worked on it rather aggressively, you might say, and gouged out the side of that. So that's definitely a candidate for replacement. And the one other piece here, I'll get it to the camera for you. This end has been damaged. It's not tragic, but if you want to make it back the way it was, then you might consider replacing that. It's worn pretty good. You'll see a difference between this end and this end in the height. It should be a good solid 3/8 of an inch, and down here it's a little over a quarter. Up here it's a good 3/8, and in between varies. So 2 out of the 3 of these would be definite candidates for replacing those muntins, and we'll get to how to cut those stock. Now the other portion of this sash is the joints themselves. Now back on the mortise and tenon. Now on the mortise and tenon joint here, I'll turn this around so you can see it. Okay. What you'll see here is you'll see in this joint now we can move that up and down, okay? What I'm looking for is to see if it's rotted, split, broken, etc. And it is not, okay? So we have a good hole there still. We have a decent hole here. So we should be able to repeg that sash when we reassemble it and put it back together and make it good and solid. Looking at the other end, okay, with the exception of a little paint part. Now if you find you need to tap on this a bit, try and use a rubber faced or a softer mallet. Don't use a regular hammer. Most sash were made of some type of pine. In this case, made up in New England. It was made out of northeastern or eastern white pine. And so using a softer faced mallet as opposed to a steel hammer is a lot easier on the wood. That'll keep you from incurring additional damage. So all I wanted to show you here was that this joint, like the other joint, is still solid, and by repegging it we should be able to bring that back into good shape. Okay, so those are the things to look for with your mortise and tenon joints, and what you might be looking for on the muntins. Now, I didn't have to remove these muntins in order to repair the divider bar on the back, and we'll show you that in another step. Okay.